Welcome to Future Back Drinking, brought to you by PepsiCo and Time. I'm your host, Dr. Athina Kanioura, and as PepsiCo's Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer, I believe it's incredibly important to speak with today's industry leaders about the technologies, innovation, and ideas that are certain to impact all of us. Future Back Drinking is not just a podcast, it's a journey through the now into the next. And joining me is my co-host Priyanka Aribindi. Hello, Priyanka.
Hi, Athina. It is so great to be back with you for another episode of Future Back Drinking. Before we get into today's episode, I know that you have some big news to share with us, really exciting news. So I'd love to pass it back to you. Please tell us about your new title.
I know it's very exciting, a very humbling moment, and I'm very appreciative for the opportunity since in addition to my current responsibilities, I'm going to be also the Latin America CEO.
Bravo. It's really exciting. If anyone can take on a challenge like this on top of everything else, it's you. And we have, again, another great episode for you today as we explore the evolving world of work and innovation. We're also really curious about what makes people feel fulfilled and happy at work and in their roles, and how we can kind of maintain and build those things while still ushering in the new technologies and innovations that are shaping our future. Athina, in your position at PepsiCo and in your new position, of course, you'll have these traditional metrics and measures of success. But I'd love to hear how you think about some of those ideas about, fulfillment and enthusiasm and building that within your workforce that are a little more difficult to quantify. How do you look at that? And is it something that you found has made a difference in PepsiCo's success?
We always have metrics. Everyone has metrics, but metrics don't reflect the full breadth of what people expect when it comes to this space. So a couple of things for sure that have worked for my team, and I would say for broadly for PepsiCo. One is you need to give people space to grow. Grow within a role, grow outside of the role, grow within their function or outside of the function. So stretching them horizontally and vertically, giving them the ability to be mobile. And mobile doesn't mean just changing country, but changing roles. And evolution of that. PepsiCo has always kind of been an academy in this space, which allowed people kind of to grow within the organization. And we have seen that this is a model that is working for our people. But on top of that, culture of learning, which aligns with the career aspirations. Because you can always learn outside of work. But when it comes to learning within your working environment, it is about your self-development.
Right.
And your ability to shape your future and your career in a way that makes it very fulfilling. So those are two of the major principles that we have followed as an organization that resonates a lot with our people. And we feel it sets a good foundation of what is to come.
Yeah, I think about your new role too. Like that sounds like what's happening for you as well. You're taking on new challenges, you're growing, it's not, stagnant. I'm excited to dig deeper into all of this with our guest today. You're not the only doctor on the show today. We have Dr. Laurie Santos with us as well. Really excited about this.
Dr. Laurie Santos is a cognitive scientist and Yale psychology professor whose work explores how we think, make decisions, and build well-being in a fast-changing world. At Yale, she created the Science of Well-being, one of the most popular courses in the university's history. Laurie is also the host of the Happiness Lab podcast. Her research sits at the intersection of psychology, technology, and leadership, offering practical guidance for anyone navigating change or building teams and cultures where people can truly thrive. Here is our conversation. Hi, Laurie. Thank you for joining us today. We always like to start things off with a very quick cheers.
Yes, cheers.
So, Laurie, thank you for making the time. We are very privileged to have you, such an esteemed professor, and you have done so much great research. What we have seen from your research is that there are things that makes us very happy, and often those things don't align with what actually drives well-being. So if you see what is happening right now in the world, where companies redesign work with AI, hybrid, and there is so much changing in the ecosystem, what do you think leaders mostly get wrong about what employees actually need to thrive?
Well, I think a big one that leaders get wrong is just the importance of happiness at work. I think, good leaders think, well, it's a nice to have, we should try to strive for it. But I don't think many people think of it as a need to have. And more work is coming out just showing the importance of happiness for individual productivity, right? One of my favorite studies on this was done in the medical field. You bring medical doctors into the lab and you give them really tough medical diagnosis problem, like the kind of thing that really requires innovative thinking. But you put half of those doctors in a really good mood first. They just watch some like stupid cat videos on YouTube, so they're laughing, right? What do you find? The doctors who are in the good mood come up with the best, most innovative solutions, right? They're the ones that are thinking outside the box. And I think, as leaders, this, like think of the last time you just felt so overwhelmed when there was like so much on your plate. You're not coming up with your best ideas then. You're not like thinking innovatively and figuring out tough problems. You're triaging, you're just getting stuff off your desk, right? But we forget that our emotional state, our mental health really matters for performance. That's all at the individual level, but new studies are coming out showing just how much this affects firm performance. My favorite study of 2024 was this study that came out of Oxford at Jan Emmanuel Denev's lab, where he partnered up with Indeed, the job website where people rate their happiness at work. And he took millions of ratings of happiness at work across 5,000 different companies. And he asked the interesting question, does happiness at work predict a firm's performance? Like, bottom line performance in terms of their stock value. And he finds a super strong, significant correlation that the companies that have the happiest workers are performing the best, right? Across all sectors, whether it's technology or the travel industry or whatever, right? And I think that studies like that are starting to point to, again, this is not a nice to have. Like, if we want people to perform well, we need to take this into account. And I think that firms that are realizing this are making the kinds of changes to promote well-being, not the like simple, we'll put a ping pong table in, but really thinking carefully about what makes people feel psychologically safe, able to create things, able to kind of have a nice harmony between work and life. These are the things that are going to matter in the new business world that we find ourselves in.
This might be, to your point, the billion-dollar question. But what are some of those practices that employers, organizations can implement that are evidence-based in order to kind of meaningfully improve employee happiness, well-being, and their capacity for this kind of work?
Well, this is why that Oxford study was like my number one study of 2024, because they asked this question. They said, okay, happiness at work predicts productivity, but what are the things that predict happiness at work? And because they're like nerdy economists, they were like, well, let's see if the economists can guess. They surveyed all these economists and they're like, what do you think is going to predict happiness at work? And people said the usual stuff, right? Compensation, having a good manager, work-life balance, et cetera, et cetera. Those things mattered, but if you look at the order of which things matter, they were kind of middling. Like they mattered and they predicted happiness at work, but not as much as people think. The number one predictor of happiness at work was a measure of belonging and social connection at work. When people answered, do you have a best friend at work? When they answered yes, that predicted happiness at work. They were questions about whether what you do matters at work. So my company cares about what I do at work. The answer to that question was predicting people's happiness at work much more so than their compensation. And so I think that this is giving leaders some action items. They're trickier action items. It's not just like give everybody a raise or give a bonus or get a better manager. It's really about what can you do to create a sense of safety, a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. And I think in the modern work environment, this gets trickier and trickier, right? Naturally, as humans, when we're all working in person, when we have a lot of time and space to make these connections, those things happen naturally. In a hybrid environment, in a remote environment, in an environment where we're incorporating all kinds of new AI tools and so on, I think leaders need to get really creative. But the bottom line is, it really seems to be about the soft stuff, like the interpersonal connections, feeling like you can chat with somebody after work over a drink, right? These are the things that wind up mattering way more than we expect.
I was wondering, how do you make that work in a hybrid environment, right? I mean, it's like every company, due to the pandemic, went remote. Most of the companies are now hybrid. Some of them are actually forcing people to go back.
Yeah, which isn't great either, right? Because people are mad, yeah.
Exactly. So what's the silver lining between getting those personal connections, but at the same time don't force people to the old working models.
Yeah. I think one of the great things psychologically is that we know something about how connection works. It works well, obviously, in person, but there's also lots of new studies showing that it works almost as good in real time. We talk about being together in real life, but often we're together in real time. You and I are doing this right now. We're chatting over this podcast tool. I can see your expressions. I can hear your emotion in real time. That works. What doesn't work is when we connect not in real time. I send you a Teams message. 5 minutes later, whoop, you send something back. Or I'm scrolling through Instagram or TikTok to see things. That kind of gives us this fake sense of connection, but it's not psychologically nutritious in the same way. And so I think a good thing about the environments that we're in right now in terms of remote work and so on is that we have so many more of these tools that allow us to connect in real time. I think the key is that what you need to do is minimize the not so in real time ones, which are the easy ones to use, right? Email, messaging, and all this stuff, and really move back to the in real time stuff. And I think when you do that in real time stuff, find ways to create virtual versions of the water cooler. Often when we join like a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, our videos are off, we're not chatting with each other. If we were together in a conference room, we'd be chatting about our day or what happened on the weekend, or I went to this new restaurant. You need to give yourself in the virtual spaces some opportunities to do that connection as well.
Let me pivot a bit. I know you have been thinking about efficiency, effectiveness, productivity. So why some people think efficiency is a poor measure of productivity, and which metrics should we all be focused on?
This is a spot where I really love the work of Cal Newport, who's an author and a kind of technology expert who's been thinking a lot about this. And he has this idea that he's come up with of pseudo-productivity, which is the kind of confusing things we use as measures of productivity in the knowledge world that don't really work, right? Say in podcasting, right? Our goal is to make really great content, really good stories that people want to listen to. But that takes a while, right? You're going to have to record this. You're going to have to edit it. What counts as productivity for that? Well, we might not really know what the real productivity is until, months, weeks later when you see the episode really out there. But we all have all these fake things that we could do. We could be setting up the meetings or sending a Teams note about, the audio recording, right? These are these signs of what Cal Newport calls visible productivity, right? They're the emails, they're the meetings, they're the stuff. And that catches our attention because it's like in this world where we're not going to see the real output for a while, well, we can measure those tiny things. But often in real knowledge work, those tiny things are taking away from the stuff that's true productivity. Every meeting I have to have, in my podcast company is some time that I'm not thinking about a cool idea for the podcast, doing the detailed edits that no one's going to see, but is going to make the product better. And so Cal Newport's advice, which I think is such great advice for leaders, is how often are you focused on the wrong kinds of productivity, the things that look like productivity but that don't really matter. And he's pushed this idea of what he calls slow productivity, which is naturally giving yourself the space to do the hard stuff, removing the visible signs of productivity, days without email, days without meetings, so you can do the hard knowledge work. He also pushes for what he calls the natural rhythms in productivity, which we know, right? Academia, there's the times of the finals period, and there's the study time, and then there's the kind of middle of the semester where you're learning things, but there's no strong outputs. In most industries, you have the same thing, right? You have the time when ideas are forming and incubating and teams are getting to know each other where there's not much visible output. And then you have the stuff that's kind of banging out, the new product, that quarterly report which has to come out, whatever it is. And Cal points out that when we forget these natural rhythms, when we kind of force them, you have to have an output, every 2 weeks or something like that, we're just not going to be able to maintain what's really going to work.
We have been talking about AI for at least a year. Feels ages. But as AI is increasingly handling more and more routine tasks, how should we all rethink job design? At the same time, keeping the engagement levels of the employees very high and with their creativity, and ultimately having very fulfilling roles.
A lot of folks have talked, I think, quite intelligently about, how AI is going to help us with all this pseudo-productivity, right? Maybe it can do the emails, or maybe it can sum up meeting reports or things like that. I think that's all great. I, as a psychologist, want people to be talking more about the psychological implications of AI, right? Because we know something that really contributes to people's productivity is their sense of psychological safety, right? Their sense that I'm okay, my job's okay, my ideas are good, and so on. And I think one of the things that AI is doing to this space, I see this so much in my young people who are thinking about getting jobs and so on, is the worry of like, maybe I'm not safe. Maybe I'm going to lose my job, right? Maybe I need to show, over and above using this AI tool what I can do. And I think as leaders start to think about incorporating AI, there's like the functional aspects of it, like what it can really do to increase your work productivity and what it can really do to improve your job performance and so on. But I think we need to start thinking about the psychological implications more than we often talk about. And I think one solution for that is to really understand how employees, people on your team, are really thinking about AI tools, what they're good at, maybe what they're not so good at, but more what they're scared of, right? Like where are the kind of pain points in incorporating these technologies, even if it's just like a paranoia, even if it's just like, I'm just scared, like I'm going to lose my job, right? Those conversations are essential for creating psychological safety and building towards some of the stuff we talked about before, where what really matters in organizations is that, an employee feels like company cares about them, cares about their opinions, respects them, and wants them to be part of something. I think there's lots of ways to incorporate AI into that productively, but when it's not done productively, it can cause fear, paranoia, anxiety about what's going on. And those are the things that we need to solve for.
Definitely. And I know a lot of what we've been talking about is more from the leadership perspective, the organization perspective. I'm really curious if you have any advice for the employee side where you're feeling uncertainty, fear, hesitation, all of those things that affect your baseline psychological safety, your ability to feel good.
Well, the research suggests a really counterintuitive strategy here, which is to openly look at and acknowledge all those negative feelings about AI, right? Our move usually when we experience negative feelings, especially in the workplace, is shut them down, pretend they're not there, just push through, right? But studies show that when you suppress your emotions, they get worse. It's like if I asked you, hey, right now, don't think of a white bear. What's the first thing you've thought of? A white bear. You were thinking about white bears all day, but now all of a sudden polar bears, whatever, popping into your mind. It's the same thing when we try to suppress our emotions. We're like, don't get spooked by the AI. The next time you go into your meeting and your supervisor brings it up, give yourself some time with grace, without judgment, to acknowledge what you're feeling, right? It makes me frustrated, anxious to see my students using LLM tools to write their papers. It makes me really worried about what they're actually learning. It makes me frustrated to figure out, well, how do I grade these things down? What's my role, right? Those are real normative emotions in the face of such fast technological change. And you just need to give yourself some time to acknowledge them. And you could do that through the simple act of journaling about stuff, expressive writing, allowing employees to have opportunities to have conversations about these things, where you're like, I'm really worried about this. What can we do to solve it, right? And so I think that kind of open dialogue, that open admitting of the emotions that we're all going through with this stuff, that's the kind of thing that we need to build space for as organizations. And that's the kind of thing that you as an individual can build your own space for. Really admit what you're going through and what you're feeling, because that kind of thing is what we can do to productively get through emotions in a healthier way, rather than just kind of suppressing them and letting them ruminate.
Wow, fascinating. As you mentioned, it's, this requires also companies to rethink a bit how they approach their employees. So if you were to think of the current structures within organizations and the workflows that they have, both in terms of operating model, but how they engage with their employees, how they can still keep people curious, creative, and motivated in an era where things are so fluid.
One strategy that we get from the science is give employees more space and more time. In a moment of so much technological change, you need to give people space to experiment, to play with things, to learn these new tools, to try stuff out, to see what works and what doesn't work. I think especially in an era where so much is changing, it's let's just deal with the bottom line, productivity at all costs. And I think this is a time where people need space. This is a time for those natural rhythms. This is a time for more opportunities to take sabbaticals, time off work, time to learn new skills, right? Reskilling is going to be really essential in these moments where things are changing. That feels scary, but so many studies show that this opportunity to take more time off, taking sabbaticals, reskilling, and so on, it winds up paying off for the employer. There's lots of folks focus, for example, on things like the 4-day work week, right, where you give people literally more time off. What so many of these studies show is that it actually winds up helping organizations. it does sometimes mean people leave, but those were the people who were going to leave anyway, right? And now they're leaving on better terms, right? You're kind of just speeding up that process of having to bring someone else new in. The studies also find that people often don't leave, right? Because they now feel like this company cares about me. They want to build my skills, and I'm going to bring those new skills that I'm building back to a company. So studies show it actually increases retention, right? And it gets you employees that are much more skilled and know what they're doing. So I think time and space to mess with this stuff, whether that's in formal ways or just in informal ways. A leader to their team just says, I just want to give you all time. You should just be taking a few hours a week just to mess around with this stuff and see what works and see what sticks. That's not our usual move, but all the studies show that that's what builds creativity and resilience in a space of so much change.
Do you see that being possible for all types of companies? For example, a company like ours, right? Where it's a company that has big frontline work, not just knowledge workers.
Yeah, there's a wonderful new book coming out by this Harvard Business School scholar, DJ Dodonna, who's studying the power of sabbaticals. And he actually finds that there are companies that give sabbaticals to frontline workers, which you might not think, right? We're going to have, the guy who's, stocking the bottles take time off. But what happens when that person gets to take some time off, whether that's paid or just allowed? A couple things happen. One is the other frontline workers around that individual fill in. You start as a company to notice, well, where's their redundancy? How can we fill these things in? You often get an employee who'll learn something new, right? So this frontline worker will bring new skills. And sometimes that's relevant for some other part of the frontline work. Sometimes that means that individual who now loves this company gets promoted and develops managerial skills and so on. What you're doing is you're often taking a moment in a company where you don't really have any resiliency, right? People are leaving and so on, and you're figuring out where you can proof it up. And you're basically just building against the things that kind of happen naturally in organizations anyway, right? Your frontline workers might take maternity leave. They might take time off for health stuff, right? Giving them time off to reskill and do these new things is just giving them the space to do what the organization's already built to do, but doing it in a way that it's really about their performance building. Because when we give people space to learn new stuff, take care of their mental health, deal with burnout, whatever it is, we're actually building space. So it looks differently in frontline work than in knowledge work, but the companies that are doing it are realizing that it winds up having a benefit not just for the employees, but a benefit for the organization as a whole.
Athina, I just want to rewind for a second. I'm really curious about how, you're thinking about all of this at PepsiCo. How are you thinking of making sure employees are engaged and coming to work and coming up with creative ideas? I'd love to hear about how you think about that and prioritize that in your work.
We are doing a lot of things to make sure that our employees feel valued as part of the different programs we have put in place. One is a massive reskilling and upskilling initiative for the past, I would say now almost 6 years since I joined the company, both around technical skills, which are very important for the evolution of their career, but also soft skills, mindfulness, and how do you take care of yourself and take care of your family. So a lot on both sides. So that is a very big, important initiative that we have undertaken as an organization. I would say the second one is, to Laurie's point, is giving people time to experiment. Obviously, within time boundaries, you cannot give people time to experiment for 6 months. Mm-hmm. But still you can give people time to experiment for 6 weeks. So we try as much as possible to give people kind of this flexibility and agility so they can feel they are contributing to the strategy rather than being told what the strategy is. And I would say the third very important thing is having assignments where we take someone from their daily job and we say, for the next 3-4 months, you're going to work on a specific special project, right? Which then helps them broaden the thinking and the horizons of how they see themselves within the organization, stretching a bit their potential, taking them out of their comfort zone. So, Laurie, if you were advising a CEO who wants to lead through major transformations like AI or new business models or anything that can change kind of the way the company operates, how would you explain the strategic importance of employee well-being?
I think we just need a reframe of how we think about mental health and emotion and all these things at the workplace. For so long, we have this model of work-life balance. And I think that model is wrong, right? It's like a balance. It's like, well, as work goes up, life goes down, and it just has to be that way. If you think of different Eastern notions, they often talk in terms of work-life harmony. And I think that's what the data show, right? If you are happy at work, that's going to make your home life much happier, right? If you give people space to learn new things, to be with their family, to not have the commute every single day, those are going to make them happier and therefore more productive at work. These things aren't in tension. They really are in harmony in helpful ways. And so I think bringing in that perspective of like, oh, no, this is a harmony. This is not an either or. This is building the pie. That can be a really helpful perspective for leaders.
One last pie in the sky kind of question for you before we get into the fun stuff. Your Yale course really reframed well-being in evidence-based ways. But if you were designing your own workplace culture from scratch, what practices would you prioritize, both in terms of well-being and output? How would you design your dream workplace?
I think I'd focus on two distinct things, right? One is build for social connection, whatever that looks like in your workplace. That could be extra time for employees to connect. It could be moving people from one part of the organization to another so they see new ideas. It could be, the fun stuff where you get together and actually meet outside of the workplace, whatever it is. So much of the data shows that social connection matters for people's happiness at work, for their retention, and ultimately for their productivity. So that would be kind of thing number one. Thing number two is that I'd try to design for psychological safety. People have their best, most creative ideas and they're happiest at work when they feel like what they do matters and what they do is safe. And I think especially in a changing technological world, this is going to become more and more important. Folks like the organizational psychologist Adam Grant have studied what are the things that make teams most creative. He's done this even looking at like the writer's room on The Daily Show and things like that. And he finds that it's a sense of what Adam calls burstiness, when it's almost like an improv group that's having all these bursting ideas and they're coming out and nobody feels like some, leader or teammate's going to be like, well, that's stupid. Well, we already tried that. It's just like you're safe to kind of generate whatever. And that allows people to be free to come up with these things. It's also just much more fun, right? People enjoy that more. And so designing workplaces that have that feature of psychological safety. And if you're not sure if your workplace has that or you want to think about how you could build that up, actually ask your employees. You'd be surprised how much the people on the ground have some ideas about how you could build these things. And so that can help you bring it from the sort of abstract concept to what it really looks like in practice in your organization.
So at the end of each episode, what we like to ask our guests is a series of quick-hitting questions to get to know them in a more personal level. So I hope you're ready. First one, what's one behavior people think makes them happier, but absolutely doesn't?
Well, we're having this conversation around the holiday season, and I will say it's buying stuff, buying material goods, right? Makes you less happy than you think and less happy for as long as you think. So don't buy stuff. If you really want to spend your money, spend it on experiences.
Good advice. If leaders could only implement one science-backed habit tomorrow, what should it be?
I say let your employees talk about stuff that's not work stuff. Just let them get a little vulnerable. Your last favorite restaurant that you went to. What are you going to do this weekend? What's some place you'd want to travel that you haven't traveled yet? These slightly deeper questions wind up making people feel more connected, and there's so much evidence that helps.
And next one. So what is a workplace norm that you hope AI forces us to rethink?
Email. Yes. And maybe meetings, right? We often say, well, that could have been an email. I think we're going to change these meetings that could have been an email to that could have been a quick AI summary that took me 2 seconds to read rather than some long thing. So yeah, get rid of the busy work, AI. Help us out. Don't make poetry. Get rid of the email.
Yes.
That's true.
What is a piece of advice that you give to your students that you think leaders should also hear?
I think a big one that I talk to my Yale students about is the importance of self-compassion. Stop beating yourself up. It's normative to be freaked out right now. It's normal to be a little bit weirded out about everything that's happening. I think leaders need to hear that too. They're often worried about how anxious their employees are, but I think it's even hard for leaders to admit that they're feeling anxious in the midst of all these changes and they're hoping they get it right and they're worried that they're not. All those are normal emotions that you need to admit and give yourself a little grace about.
Now, last one. So it wouldn't be a future back drinking podcast without this question. If you could choose anyone, and I'm saying anyone, to have a drink with, who would it be and why?
I mean, that's always very, very hard because there's lots of people I would like to have a drink with. But these days I've been thinking a lot about how we communicate and how scientists can get the message across, both for businesses and just for people in the world who need to hear a scientific message. So right now, if you ask me who I'd love to get a drink with, I think it would be Carl Sagan. He was such a good science communicator, and I don't think we have beloved scientists in the way right now, and I think we need them, and he just knows a bunch of fun star stuff, so it would be Carl Sagan right now.
Laurie, I cannot stress enough how fun this was for me.
Oh, thank you so much.
I mean, I learned so much. I can't wait to see you face to face and talk more. Thank you for everything, for your expertise, for your knowledge, for sharing that with the audience. It was an exceptional podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
That was an amazing episode with Dr. Laurie Santos. I know both of us were jotting down notes, taking down so many valuable, human, implementable, evidence-backed takeaways for everyone. Athina, I'd love to hear, what your favorite things were that you learned here.
Okay, well, where do I start? Okay, firstly, work-life harmony. I'm stealing that seamlessly. I mean, it's so true, so true. We always talk about work-life balance, but work-life harmony makes so much more sense. I think it's about taking time and kind of stepping back and giving our employees the opportunity to just think and experiment and talk. And how pretty much you have an ecosystem within the working environment that people can also have fun and connections and moments that they share things with each other. So it was such a great conversation. I'm sure our audience will think the same. It's Dr. Laurie Santos is an amazing professional, but also so grounded to what truly matters for people.
Yeah, and I think so much of it is intuitive. I think about myself when I'm having fun and doing something at work that is engaging and challenging and I feel good. Everything in my life gets better. I'm happier. I'm excited to talk about it. So of course it makes sense that on a macro level, that if you kind of implement that in your workplace, the better everything gets.
Yeah,
kind
absolutely.
of amazing.
Thank you for listening to Future Back Drinking. We truly hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and stay connected with us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, take care.